They called my home the Granny Pod and spoke of replacing it with a guest house for their important friends from the city. They didn't know the very land their own sprawling home stood on, the earth that held their foundation, was still titled in my name. They mistook my silence for surrender. It wasn't. It was strategy. The silverware clinked against the porcelain like brittle bones. No one spoke, but the silence was screaming. The roast chicken was perfectly seasoned, the mashed potatoes creamy and hot. Not that anyone at the table seemed to notice. My daughter-in-law, Catherine, leaned across the table, her diamond earrings swinging like tiny merciless pendulums. She set her wine glass down with a sharp, definitive clink. "You know," she began, her voice a weapon wrapped in silk, "if your mother is still living here when the Vanderbilts visit next weekend, it's going to be awkward." She directed this at my son, Thomas, but her cold, sharp eyes were fixed on me. These were the same eyes that had once looked at me with adoration, back when I'd stayed up all night to hand-sew the lace hem of her wedding dress. I had welcomed her into my home, into my life, like the daughter I never had. Now I was a liability, an unsightly piece of furniture that clashed with her decor. "If Mother Vance is still here," she continued, articulating each word slowly as if I were a simple-minded child, "it will make us look small. They're from Richmond, Thomas. They have a summer home in the Hamptons. They host dinners with wine pairings and curated guest lists, not live-in relatives." Thomas didn't even look up from his phone, his thumb flicking absently across the glowing screen. His fork moved without purpose over his plate, pushing a piece of chicken from one side to the other. Catherine pressed on, her voice gaining a righteous edge. "I mean, let's just call it what it is. She doesn't pay rent. She doesn't contribute to the utilities. The garden she insists on keeping is half dead, and she takes up the exact space where we could build our sunroom. Honestly," she looked straight at me now, her gaze unblinking, "you are a freeloader. Perhaps it's time to consider assisted living. Let the state take care of you. That's what it's for, after all." I didn't move. My hands, worn from a lifetime of work, were folded neatly in my lap. My teacup sat untouched. "And, frankly," she added, her voice rising slightly, a carefully modulated crescendo of indignation, "you should be grateful we even let you stay here. Most people wouldn't. We have been more than generous." Thomas finally glanced up. It was a brief, fleeting look, devoid of any warmth or anger, just a flat, gray indifference that was 1,000 times more painful. "Yeah, Mom, Catherine's right. I mean, most people your age are in homes. It's not like you're contributing. My son, my only son." I looked at the space around me, at this dining room that held the ghosts of my life, the heavy oak table I had stained and polished myself, the antique china cabinet with the hairline crack near the bottom, a relic from when Thomas was 3 years old and knocked it over with his favorite toy truck, the linen curtains I had embroidered with tiny, intricate violets while waiting for a phone call from my husband, a call that never came because he was already gone. Every inch of this house, this property, the very land beneath it, held pieces of me, pieces of my history. And yet at that moment, I wasn't even a person to them. I was a burden, a dead weight, an inconvenience wrapped in graying hair and a worn cardigan. Catherine stood up to clear her plate, her heels clacking against the hardwood floor with an air of finality. "I'm calling the contractor tomorrow," she announced over her shoulder. "We'll start digging the foundation for the guest house on Monday. We'll need the garden cleared by then." That was my garden, the last small patch of this place that still felt like it belonged to me, if only in spirit. Thomas shrugged, his eyes already back on his phone. "Guess you'll need to move your stuff, Mom. They'll need access to the backyard." I stood slowly. My joints protested, but I didn't let it show. I looked at Thomas.
I truly looked at him searching for the boy I had raised. He had his father's eyes, but none of his fire, none of his unwavering integrity. I had raised that boy with hands that bled through harsh winters spent mending fences, with feet that stood vigil at hospital beds, and with arms that had carried the entire weight of his future on my back. I gave him everything I had. I gave him this land, and on this night, he gave me only silence. But that silence screamed louder than any insult ever could. I walked back to my cottage behind their sprawling main house. It was a small place, just 2 rooms, a kitchenette, and the garden outside. In that garden, I planted rosemary for remembrance, tomatoes for sustenance, basil for strength, and a defiant line of marigolds along the back fence. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I sat at my little kitchen table, pulled open the drawer, and removed a thick brown envelope. Inside were the original deeds to the land. My name, Eleanor Vance, written in clear, decisive script on every single page. Years ago, I had given Thomas the right to build on the land, to live on it, to raise his family on it, but I had never signed over ownership. They never asked. They had simply assumed. I placed the deed on the table, alongside a folded, yellowing map of the property. The boundary lines were clear. My cottage, the garden, their main house, the rolling hills down to the creek. All of it rested squarely within the borders of my land. They thought I was weak because I stayed quiet. They thought my silence was surrender. I looked out the window. The lights from their house cast long, arrogant shadows over the grass. I could hear music now, a thin thread of jazz drifting through the night. Catherine was likely setting up a playlist for next weekend's important guests. I imagined my little cottage gone, replaced by a sleek guest house with white stone and a private wet bar. I imagined them showing guests around, bragging about their pool, their view, their open concept layout, all of it built on bones they had forgotten they stood on. My bones. That night I didn't sleep. I lit a single candle and watched it burn down to the wick, thinking of my husband Richard. He had died before he could see Thomas grow into the man he was now. Perhaps that was a mercy. In the morning, before the Virginia dawn broke, I opened my closet and pulled out my old suitcase. The zipper stuck, as it always did. I packed only what I truly needed: a few changes of clothes, a small jewelry box, the framed photo of Thomas as a boy, and the deed. I didn't cry. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said in their actions. I stepped outside into the cool pre-dawn air. The garden glistened with dew. I knelt, my old knees protesting, but I didn't let it show. I touched the dark, rich soil one last time. "Thank you," I whispered to the rosemary bush. Then I turned, locked the cottage door behind me, and walked away, down the long gravel driveway. I walked because I had nowhere else to go, but because I had finally remembered that this land was mine, and they had forgotten. But I hadn't. Not anymore.
Ether, I taught him how to turn compost, how to stake tomato plants, how to read the soil. He seemed happy. He found work with a local construction crew, saved his money, and eventually, with my financial help for the foundation, built a modest but handsome 2-bedroom house on the land. I was so proud. I thought, foolishly, that this land would hold our family together, a legacy for generations. Then Catherine arrived. She was lovely, charming, and unfailingly polite whenever Thomas was around. But the moment he left the room, a subtle chill would enter her voice. "Eleanor, could you perhaps not hang your laundry on the line? It does make the place look a bit rural. I've just cleaned the kitchen, so please don't bake today. It leaves a scent." Her critiques were always framed as gentle suggestions, but they felt like tiny, persistent cuts. She began to take over the outdoor space, installing a massive stone fire pit near the edge of my garden without asking. She referred to my cottage as the guest house when her friends came to visit. At first, I chalked it up to the stress of newlywed life.
I cooked for them, watched their dog when they traveled, watered their houseplants. I'd tried to be helpful, to be small, to be unobtrusive. Then one afternoon, I overheard her on the phone, her voice bubbling with false sincerity. "Oh, she's always just there," she'd said to a friend, "like a silent little housekeeper. I mean, I guess it's convenient. Free help is free help, right?" Free help? I left the mixing bowl I was returning by her back door and walked back to my cottage, my chest burning. From that day on, things shifted irrevocably. Thomas visited my cottage less and less. He stopped joining me in the garden. He started calling me Ma instead of Mom, a small change that felt like a deliberate distancing. Catherine took control of their household, and soon mine as well. She decided when I could host my own friends. She scheduled loud landscaping projects without warning. She once had my prize-winning marigolds torn out by accident by a careless lawn crew. I kept my head down. It's what women of my generation knew how to do. I tended my garden, I fed the birds, and I lit a candle every Sunday for my husband. But the boundaries, once so clearly defined, began to dissolve. My home was becoming a shed in their backyard. My identity was being whittled down to that of a helpful old woman who didn't know when to leave. I had given them space. I had given them peace. And in return, they had slowly, methodically erased me. It was 3:04 a.m. when I unzipped the old suitcase. My hands were steady. My thoughts were clear as glass. I folded my sweaters one by one. I packed the photo of Thomas as a toddler and the gold chain from my husband. When the bag was packed, I sat at my small wooden table and wrote a single sentence on a piece of notepaper. "Thomas, my dear son, I never wanted to be a burden. I am going now. Not out of shame, but for peace. And you take care. Mom." I slipped the note beneath the salt shaker on my kitchen counter. At 3 a.m., I locked the door behind me. The moonlight spilled across my garden, glinting off the morning dew. I did not cry. I did not look back. I walked to the main road where a cab I'd called waited for me under the name Mrs. Elkins. As we pulled away, I saw the two homes, one small and one large, sitting side by side like a mother and child. But one had outgrown the other, or so it thought. I arrived at a hotel in Richmond before dawn. I checked in under my maiden name, Vance, and sat at the small desk in the room with the deeds spread out before me. My name, Eleanor Evans, was on every page. I had never formally gifted the land, never transferred ownership. Thomas had assumed. Catherine had assumed. But assumptions are not contracts. At 8:03 a.m., I called Paul Benedetti, my late husband's oldest friend and former law partner. "Paul," I said, my voice firm, "it's Eleonora. I need your help. Today." An hour later, in his office that smelled of pine wood and strong coffee, I laid the deed on his desk. "I want to sell the land, Paul," I said simply. He blinked. "All of it?" "All of it." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "I assume this isn't a casual decision." "You know me better than that," he smiled faintly. "Indeed I do." By noon, Paul had found a buyer. "There's a development firm, Eleanor," he explained. "They're building a high-end equestrian community. They've been trying to acquire the surrounding parcels for months. Your land is the final piece of the puzzle. They'll pay a premium, and they'll pay fast." "How fast?" "Contracts signed today, funds in escrow by Friday, full demolition rights included." I sat very still. I thought of Catherine's voice. "That old granny pot is coming down." I thought of Thomas's. "Let the state take care of you." I thought of my marigolds. And then I nodded. "Let's do it." By 2:17 p.m., I had signed the documents. The land was sold. Every inch, from the rose beds I'd planted to the fire pit Catherine installed, from their 2-story dream house to the little wooden cottage I had once called my sanctuary. Sold. The demolition started with a letter taped to their front door, a plain white envelope delivered by courier, sealed with the golden insignia of a luxury development corporation. Inside, a notice of property transfer, a 5-day eviction warning, and a preliminary demolition schedule. Catherine found it first. She screamed. Thomas thought it was a prank. He yanked the papers from her hand, his face draining of color as he read. He called the county office, the assessor, the registrar of deeds. Each time, the same answer. The land was never under your name. Title records confirm. Original ownership belonged to Eleonora Avance. Sale completed and finalized last Friday. She never signed it over? Catherine's voice was a hiss of disbelief. You mean to tell me we spent $200,000 remodeling a house we don't even own? Thomas didn't answer. He just kept dialing my number, his face a mask of dawning horror. The next morning, the bulldozers came. They were bright yellow, like giant mechanical wasps. The sound of their engines filled the pristine country air. Catherine ran outside in her silk robe, mascara smeared across her cheeks. "You can't do this," she shrieked at the crew leader. He checked his clipboard, unbothered. "Ma'am, according to my paperwork, you have until noon today to remove your personal belongings. I suggest you start now." Thomas stumbled out behind her, shirtless and barefoot, clutching his laptop like it was his only child. The neighbors peeked through their blinds, murmuring in disbelief. By noon, my garden was gone. By 1 p.m., the foundation for their guest house was torn up like paper. By 2:30, the first corner of their home, the sunroom Catherine had coveted, came crashing down. Catherine screamed, a raw animal sound of loss. And Thomas just stood there, holding her, a man finally witnessing the death of something he had never properly valued until it was too late. They left that evening in a borrowed pickup truck, their expensive lives shoved hastily into plastic bins, and I, from the window of my new apartment on the 10th floor overlooking the city, watched my phone ring. It was Thomas. I saved his last broken voicemail, but I did not call back. Sorrow doesn't rebuild gardens. It doesn't erase words like freeloader. It doesn't return the kind of dignity you are forced to reclaim in silence. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but this was not revenge. It was restoration. It was the quiet, precise rebalancing of scales that had been left tilted for too long. I didn't lose a son. I lost the illusion that he had ever truly seen me. And while that brought its own kind of grief, it was also freeing, because now I could finally see myself. I saw what I had built, what I had endured, and what I had reclaimed, not with shouting, not with spite, but with quiet steps, signed papers, and the unshakable strength of knowing you hold the deed to your own life.